Jonny Miller, the nervous system master.
Howdy.
Cheers to you.
Great to be here. Cheers.
Ready for a yarn?
Let's do it.
What do you got there? Coconut water.
Sparkling water with squeezed lemon.
That sounds very fancy.
Refreshing.
It's morning here. It's afternoon there. I do have a coffee, and hopefully that's allowed when we're talking about nervous system mastery.
Not going to be banished from the the conversation. Very much loud. I appreciate espresso myself every once in a while.
I was going to say, you still love a coffee?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. So I've got a few questions planned, but also I'm so happy to see where our conversation goes because, anytime we talk, whether it's just you and I talking as friends or, more formal, whatever, we always end up going somewhere great with the conversations. It's always fun.
I totally agree. Yeah, I'm excited for you to be steering the ship this time. It's normally the other way around.
Yeah, same. And we don't have the greatest amount of time together. So I'm not going to go into like a whole backstory necessarily of your life. That might come out in the questions we ask, but I'm more keen just to get into the good gear that I think and I hope is going to be so relevant to the people that watch this. Most people that watch this have either come through our work as mentors and life coaches or through their interest in meditation and mindfulness, people that have done meditation teacher trainings, So I think talking about the nervous system is going to be something that is so relevant to everyone that's watching for sure. And I just had a thought before too, that I'm really interested and curious personally, because I'm sure I've told you this somewhere along the line, but you might have forgotten because it was so many years ago, probably even just before I met you, which was about 7 years ago in Bali, I think.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah.
I had shingles. And obviously it's a nervous system disease. And it was so bad and so painful. And we had a friend that was a nurse, and I remember one point she came over and I showed her the sores all up and down my back.
Wow.
And she was like, "Wow, that's one of the worst shingle cases I've seen." And the reason it was so bad is because I had glandular fever virus at the same time, so my immune was compromised. So, apparently shingles is like an opportunist disease where if the immune's compromised, it comes into its expression. And
I'm saying it's like twist the knife on whatever you're suffering.
yeah. And I remember I went to this amazing functional medicine doctor, and I said, I think I've got shingles. And she goes, give me a look. And she's like, yeah, you got shingles. And I was like, so I've never experienced it was the worst pain. And she said to me, have you been stressed? And me being me at that time and always putting on a bit of a veneer and thinking that exterior calm meant not stressed. And I was like, nah, I'm being stressed. I don't do stress. And she kind of looked at me. She was really, you could just see she was intuitive. She just looked at me and went, interesting. Okay. When was the last time you weren't thinking about work? And I just started crying.
Wow.
She just asked this question. And I was like, well, tears come to my eyes. And I said, I honestly have no idea. I have no idea. And at that stage, I was probably 34 or something like that. Yeah. And since I started my business when I was 29, I'd never stopped thinking about work. Even if I'd had a break, I was always thinking about, always hustling, always trying, always efforting. And from there, it was such a healing process in terms of the kind of aftermath of shingles means that my nervous system was compromised, and it wouldn't let me get away with overworking or stressing. Like if I do a big day of work, the pain would come back for years actually. And so I nearly had to restore my nervous system. So there's questions, and I sometimes still feel the effects of it. Like if I get overstressed, the specific spots where it feels like the nerve endings are sensitive, it still hurts there if I work hard for a couple of days in a row and don't look after myself or honor my nervous system.
Wow.
So that's a bit of a pre-frame in terms of my selfish reasons for wanting to chat to you about this stuff. And I'm sure it'll relate to so many other people that have had similar things, whether it's overwhelm or burnout or chronic fatigue or anything like that.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, in some ways that like breaks my frame of how I imagine you as this kind of like very calm, kind of like never stress. You know, maybe it's like the duck that's like serene on the surface and then paddling like a motherfucker on underwater.
Yeah,
But
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I at the time I didn't even realize I was doing it.
uh,
Like I was just uh, trying to get ahead, and at that stage we were back in Australia trying to start a business, and things were, yeah, just go 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 go, and my body was
mm,
like, eh.
yeah. Yeah, I mean it's definitely it's so common in obviously the work that I do and the people that I see, and the frame that or the metaphor that I like to share is this idea of feather brick dump truck, and how our body will give us these signs, when we're pushing it a bit too hard, when we've got the foot on the gas pedal for a bit too long. Initially it's like a feather, maybe that's like you wake up and you feel a bit tired in the morning, and then you ignore that, or if you ignore that for a period of time, and then there's some brick, and it sounds like in this case the brick was like a shingles outbreak. And then for other people, they could maybe even ignore that, and then there's a dump truck in the form of like some full-blown health crisis or a relationship breakup or whatever that is. And I think that's generally, at least the perspective that I have, is it's like our body is trying to give us feedback all the time through interoception, and um, our capacity to override, whilst maybe helpful in the short term, if the longer we ignore it, the louder it has to like shout. And it sounds like for you, you've now almost got this like very real-time feedback of like you start to notice, if you've been working a little bit intensely for 2 days, it's like, oh, it's like reminding you. um but yeah, it can also be, super challenging for a lot of people as well, especially if people get Lyme's disease or chronic fatigue syndrome or really
Mm,
serious chronic health conditions, and it can be really challenging.
mm. So just clarify for us, what is interoception?
So interoception is a fancy word that basically means our capacity to track and for me, I would consider myself um, interoceptively numb for most of my life. Pretty much until like around about the time I met you, honestly, in Bali. Like I was very just like numb from the neck down, very intellectual, very loved the mind, loved figuring things out. And for me, the journey has been increasing that interoceptive awareness. And yeah, so over the past, 5 years, really, I've been actively training this interoceptive capacity and relearning how to listen and pay attention to my body.
Mm,
Um, because I went through a burnout period in my startup days many years ago. I've um, just and realized how disconnected I was from my emotions as well. And meditation has actually been a really useful tool for this as well. But I now consider uh, interoceptive capacity to be just like a really essential human skill that many of
mm,
us just don't know that they don't have access to.
mm. Yeah, amazing. Thank you. So my first question, what we've just said, everything we've just said perfectly feeds into my first question, which is, in terms of nervous system mastery, one of the things that you work on with people is about increasing um, your resilience and your tolerance to stress. Um, how does that, do you get people that come in and they want to do more, be more, go harder. And so they're like, I want to increase my tolerance to stress, so they can achieve more.
Mm.
How do you have the conversation between recognizing a healthy desire to increase your tolerance to stress versus the need to actually do less and return to being or cultivate calm? Like, how do you figure out that conversation with
Mm.
the driven and helping them realize that maybe it might be what they think they want, but it's not what they need. But for some people, it
Mm.
might be what they need. So you kind of understand what I'm,
Yeah,
because I
no, I
imagine
do.
I know you work with a lot of people in corporate world, in startup, like a lot of people that would be driven.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I mean, diving in with the with the hard-hitting questions here. Um, it's a really interesting um area to explore. The way that I relate to it is there are almost different vectors or different capacities that we can train. One of them is increasing our capacity to tolerate and be with stress, basically increasing the window of tolerance.
Mhm.
And that is that's actually for some people, very necessary if they have a very small window, which means that they could go into a busy street and suddenly feel really overwhelmed or
Mm.
feel anxious in social situations. Like in those cases, there's a real need for increasing what's known as, it's a complex term, but it's ventral vagal tone is like the phrase, and that's basically referring to our capacity to feel embodied safety, like feel safe in my body, to connect with other people, and to then access states of play, states of connection to self and others. And so, to your question around, are there some people who want to build their capacity so that they can do more faster, essentially? um if people want to do that, then that's that's completely up to them. Like I'm not here to kind of make any like moral judgments about what one should or shouldn't do with their life. um and my sense is that if there is a sufficient amount of like interoception online, i.e. like attunement to what they're experiencing in their body, and they're not just overriding, then if someone has enormous capacity, maybe they work for, I just interviewed a lady who works as a lead therapist for MAPS, and she's doing multiple sessions per day for many hours at a time. And my sense is that I heard her schedule, I was like, whoa, like that must take a huge amount of energy. That, to me, that sounds incredibly draining. But my sense is that over the years she's just built up an incredible capacity so that she can do that, and she's capable of that without feeling drained. um
Mm.
but I think the key thing is that there is that attunement to the body, and so that when you do start to feel like, oh, I'm starting to feel kind of tired, or I need a break, or I need to feel through these emotions, um that there is then the the understanding of then how to kind of have an equal rest ethic. So I love this idea from Kevin Kelly. He says, if you have a strong work ethic, you must have an equally strong rest ethic.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people uh struggle to access those deeper states of restorative rest. And you can think about Olympic athletes, right, who they are at the top of their game and they train incredibly hard, but they really, really, really prioritize their high quality sleep, sometimes 10, 11 hours. Like the recovery piece is just as important as the training piece for them, because that's where they build the muscle growth. It's where where the improvements take place.
Mm.
um so yeah, I think it's, for me, the phrase nervous system mastery, it might be helpful to define in terms here, is increasing the space between stimulus and response. So
Mm.
decreasing reactivity, essentially. That's kind of what I like to talk about, how what I'm training. And so instead of having a knee-jerk reaction to something, or doing something, binge eating food, or doing something unintentionally, by having these certain practices to increase interoceptive awareness, to down regulate our nervous system when we're feeling hijacked, then we can make more intentional choices. And I think that for me, that's kind of what it comes down to, is like living in a way that is more intentional than
Mm,
if we are just hijacked by triggers or by things in the world.
yeah. So would you say that learning to down regulate the nervous system is a key component with functional decision making?
I would also add in so there's three components to what I teach. The first is the interoception piece that we covered. The
Mm-hmm.
second is um, self-regulation, which could be down-regulation. It could also be up-regulation. You know, for people that are very lethargic, like we learned Kapalabhati breathing, like
Mm-hmm.
breath of fire, to like really energize the system. And the third is what I call emotional fluidity, which is basically your ability to welcome the full spectrum of emotions of human experience.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to decision making, both tuning into what what your gut is telling you, what your intuition is telling you, which comes from these somatic senses, and also something that I've noticed is that we will sometimes unconsciously make decisions to avoid feeling a certain way.
Mm.
So by doing the work of emotional fluidity, we are avoiding that unconscious bias that we might we might want to avoid feeling afraid or avoid feeling shame or whatever it is, and our decisions will be biased. And usually when we decide in that way, the world conspires to then actually like force us to feel that thing in a way that we really don't want to.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like
Yeah. The
um
feather, the brick, the
yeah. So that's that's how I view this work, as like
mm.
intersecting with decision making.
That's amazing. And those three things are they're such great pillars for us, I think, to learn. And the reason I ask is because I know through the mentoring work I do, and I'm sure it's the same for you, is that so many people in this day and age are just riddled with pressure
Mm,
and are acting out of pressure. And there's a belief that if I turn off the pressure or if I turn off the stress, I won't have the necessary motivation to do what I have to do to
mm,
stay relevant, to make the necessary finances or whatever it might be. And so there's a kind of clinging and attachment to the unhealthy nervous system response. And that's
mm,
probably what it was like for me before pre-shingles.
mm,
And so the reason I asked about decision making, because it seems like when we learn to regulate, firstly become aware of our embodied experience, interoception, learn to be able to regulate our nervous system so we can really tune into what's true for us,
mm.
be honest with where we're at, the emotional fluidity. Would you say being regulated, self-aware would give us the capacity to actually be more efficient and creative?
Mm.
So we learn to act without the pressure.
Yes, with the caveat that I think the lived experience for a lot of people is that um, it's almost like changing the fuel source, in that if someone's been running on like a really dirty coal or something for a long period of time that has a lot of emissions, uh, there's often a period that on the surface looks like lethargy or laziness, but maybe they don't do any work for 4 to 6 months, something like that. But then
Mm,
on the other side, when they're able to tap into their kind of intrinsic motivation and sense of excitement, joy, stoke, curiosity of for whatever the thing is, then in my experience, that there's actually it's like a much deeper well of energy than being driven by scarcity or trying to prove themselves, validation, whatever the previous drivers were, which
yeah.
are very common. And I think a lot of successful people are still driven by those things. But I believe that there is like an equal and maybe even deeper reservoir of energy that can come from that place of intrinsic excitement for
Mm,
whatever people are doing. Um, yeah, and the transition can be challenging.
yeah. And so if one of someone was in this situation and imagine that they uh, regulated themselves, had the self-awareness, the embodied experience, and then there was some emotion, like you talked about emotional fluidity, like they
Mm.
They had been acting out of pressure or
Mm.
stress or seeking validation. But then they became aware, so they're no longer acting out of it, became aware. Whoa,
Mm.
here's some emotions. Ugh. What's this about? Like, we're actually with our experience. This stress feels like this. The emotion is painful. There's grief, sadness, fear. You know, one of the things that you've told me that you share with people you work with that I just love is called somatic surfing.
Mm.
So in a situation like that, is that where you'd use that technique? And if it is, could you just give us a kind of brief overview of what somatic surfing looks like?
Yeah, yeah, sure. And the other, I guess, like term that's maybe helpful for people is this idea of emotional debt, which can actually be measured in the body in what's known as allostatic load. And this is basically, you can think of this as all of the times in which an intense emotion has arisen, and due to, maybe it not being appropriate or any number of factors, it's just been like pushed down and
Yeah.
like not now, like this. And that can be from our early childhood to recent experience. And this, over a period of time, creates this fragility in the nervous system, which leads to less capacity, which leads to reactivity, all these things. And so by engaging in the excavation or the process of relieving this emotional debt, we kind of access a lot more capacity for energy, I think.
Mm.
And yeah, one of the practices that I teach in the course is called somatic surfing, which uh, as you can imagine, it's about riding the waves of these emotions as they're arising. And so what that looks like on a practical level is, very similar to some of the meditations that you've guided me through in the past, where you kind of identify maybe there's a part that's feeling a certain way, and you drop down into the body and you're like, okay, where do I feel this in my body? What am I noticing? Maybe there's like a tightness in the chest, or like a knot in the belly, like a clenching. And the invitation is to go in with curiosity and to just maybe label, like, maybe, oh, it feels like dull, or it feels icky, or it feels, whatever the thing is. And then with curiosity and a sense of welcoming, and I think something that took me a long time to learn was to engage in this like without a change agenda, like without trying to do something to make it go away, which can often be
Oh,
like a
yeah.
really subtle underlying motivation for doing this type of thing, but it actually really impedes the process.
Mm.
So going in with this kind of intention to welcome everything, and once you really start to bring presence to whatever the feeling or sensation is, often it will start to shift, or it will start to move, or it will start to grow, or like it's not static. It becomes a thing. And the process is really just staying in that presence. Kind of, sometimes there can be a temptation to jump into the story, or to come back into the mind, or to push it away. And the art is really just staying with it and welcoming it. And eventually it will, or almost always, uh, turn, kind of soften and almost like melt, and often melt into a sense of like joy, or beauty, or connection. Like there's often, at least in my experience, it um melts into something that feels like beautiful, and it's almost like welcoming a part of myself back into my psyche, a part that has been exiled, or like maybe it was, I felt ashamed for something I did when I was a kid, something along those lines. And then it's like, oh, you welcome it back in, and you feel more whole.
Mm.
um, and this is, I mean, it's essentially the same work that maps are doing right now with the assistance of psychedelics and MDMA and these entheogens. I think it's a similar process, and it doesn't require, these fancy bells and whistles. I think it can just be engaged with presence and curiosity.
Mm. Well, I love that. And so presence and curiosity
Mm.
in the absence of seeking.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, just being with will allow whatever is in the body to run its natural course. And would you say there's, in that regard, there's a natural intelligence in the body that wants to process and integrate its own accumulated material?
100%. Yeah. And
Isn't that interesting?
it's fascinating. And I was reading through some of the MAPS studies. These are, like published in scientific journals, and they talk about the innate intelligence of the body. And I was like, oh, interesting. Like they're putting these terms that, could be considered like unscientific or whatever, but they are being used in these clinical trials that have been, hundreds, I think almost 2,000 people have been through. And yeah, that is absolutely my experience, that there is a sense that the body knows how to heal itself. It's more just a case of how can we like create the conditions for that to emerge and really get out of the way.
Yeah. And I'm sure, I don't know if you found this in your own experience, but I definitely have, that it's a learned practice to be able to be with,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the emotional environment I grew up in. Very good at sweeping everything under the rug. No space for anger.
Mm-hmm.
Just if anger got met with shame, you know, uh, all negative emotion was just swept away. And so it really did take some time and a learned practice to learn to welcome whatever's going on in the body and just sit with it, the discomfort of it.
Mm.
So yeah, it seems like, is that been the same for you? Like an actual thing you have to learn. It doesn't just come, and that's what meditation helps with as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. For me, relearning or creating a healthy relationship to anger was a huge one as well. I think I associated anger with losing control and potentially hurting other people, and just felt it as wrong. And it may be similar to you. I thought I was like very calm for a lot of my, I'm just like, just not an angry guy. Like I just keep my cool the whole time. And it was interesting just realizing how much like stored rage there was in me, and how that can be expressed in a way where it's, as long as it's not directed at someone, if it's just like into the ocean or into a pillow or whatever it is, that there's so much energy that gets released on the other side. And my experience as well is that often people who have depression, that can often be a symptom of repressed anger, where the anger is directed inwards and internally, and they have like a very critical internal monologue. And that by giving that anger an outlet, a safe outlet where it's welcomed, that depression can just kind of spontaneously lift.
Yeah, wow, that's so cool.
Mm.
So emotional accumulation, the accumulation of stress and emotions that are suppressed and harbored, lead to nervous system fragility.
Exactly.
And it's interesting because when I first think of nervous system mastery, the first thing I think of is the breath.
Mm.
And it's so cool to hear that there's so much more to it. And it's so much more of a holistic model that you're sharing with people in your course about interoception, emotional fluidity, and there's so much more to it. And even all the scientific backing and all that. It's a wonderful, sounds like a, wonderfully holistic approach. So don't suppress your emotions, people. But you're so true. It's so true as well. Sometimes we have to, because there might be a certain circumstance. Sometimes we don't feel safe to express them. Sometimes we don't even know we're doing it. Sometimes it's stuff from 30 years ago. We have no idea it was even there. And so I'm joking, of course. So in terms of nervous system mastery, what would you say for our friends that are listening would be helpful, that other than what I've already talked about, of course, would be helpful for them to know now? What's something they need to know?
Well, you just mentioned the breath. And I think the breath is an incredible ally and tool. And these are actually some practices that I learned from you, I think, back in the day, in Bali and then in Australia. It's both a diagnostic tool in the sense of if it's really hard for you to take a full inhale, or it's hard to kind of exhale all the way down into your lower belly, then that's often a sign that there's some tension internally, which is often linked to what we just talked about.
Mm.
And the breath can also be a kind of a real-time tool for this self-regulation, which basically means like calming down if you're anxious, stressed, overwhelmed, or becoming more alert if you're feeling the opposite. So, as I imagine some of your listeners might know, if you have an exhale that is twice the length of the inhale, that creates a calming effect. And if the inhale is twice as long as the exhale, or more intense, that creates an activating effect. And so even armed with that simple knowledge, you can do things like when I go freediving, we'll do this thing called triangle breathing, where we'll breathe in for 3, we'll hold for 3, and then we'll exhale for 6. And you can wear like a heart rate monitor and not only feel the relaxation, but my heart rate will, decrease down from like 65 to like 45 or something in the space of a minute or so, which then allows me to free dive. So it's like very helpful in that context as well. So I think the breathing practices are also a very like empowering technique, because a lot of people, maybe not people listening to this, but a lot of people in our culture will rely on substances, or maybe like medications, different things, because they feel like they're a victim to their nervous system in a way. Something will happen, they will start to feel anxious and overwhelmed, and the only thing they know how to do is to, maybe it's drinking alcohol or taking a Xanax or something like that. And it's, for me, it's a much more empowering approach to be like, oh, I can just change the way I breathe, and in a couple of minutes I'm going to feel a lot better. So that, in terms of just like a quick hit of something that is like immediately practical, I think that's a really helpful thing to just have in your mental toolkit. And then the thing becomes like, okay, how do I practice this on a regular basis, so that when I am hijacked, that I remember to do that, and not whatever the default pattern is.
Yeah, cool. And in that sense, I guess the daily conscious practice of breathing increases the interoception, so that when you are hijacked, you feel, oh, my breath's just changed, because you're used to noticing what it feels like to breathe in a calm manner.
Precisely. Yeah. So if you're noticing like, oh right, like my breath is really shallow and I'm kind of panting, and it's like through my mouth, and it's like, oh, interesting. Like, I wonder what like, is there
Yeah.
something going on here? Like, have
Yeah.
I been working for 3 days straight and not slept? It's like, oh, okay, maybe I should go take a nap or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that I like, the simplest tools ever that I share with people in this exact regard, it's nearly even simpler than a precise breathing method, is just 2 words: soft belly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so funny, because our culture, especially for women, more so, I think, is, like, suck your belly and tense your abs so you look fit and thin, and or whatever. And so, as you know, as soon as we do that, when our abdomen is engaged, it also engages little muscles, the spinal stabilizer muscles, that trigger be aware in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
But then it also prevents the diaphragm from dropping. So it prevents us from being able to breathe deeply into the lower lobes of the lungs.
Mm-hmm.
And so even just by having tension in the belly can impede us in getting into that parasympathetic state, to be able to experience calm when there's no threat around. And so, and the other interesting, I don't know if you found this as well, but the other interesting thing is, I've met so many people who can't soften their belly,
Yeah.
and they have to like lay down on their back and feel genuinely deeply safe and relaxed, and put like a heavy sandbag or something, like a
Mm-hmm.
few books on their belly, so they can be actually like trained to feel it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to mention that. So that's a really great practice. We had a probably like a 4 or 5 kilogram belly stone in our breathwork training, and
Ah,
just
unreal.
like you said, like lying on that and putting it like just below the belly button and just practicing like inhale through the nose and then just like letting it go. Like it really does. It's so helpful for training that as the default breathing, as opposed
Mm,
to like you say, most of us it's um sometimes upper chest and at minimum, just around the diaphragm. And there's so many parasympathetic like nerves like down in that area as well. So just the act of breathing down there is calming in and of itself.
mm. I was chatting with a nurse one day who um, told me that in the bottom 1/3 of the lungs are 60% of the parasympathetic nerve receptors.
Hmm.
Does that sound about right?
That sounds right to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So isn't that crazy? Like the bottom 1/3. So if these are the lungs, there's the top 2/3, there's the bottom. In the base of the lungs, there's 60%, not of the parasympathetic, 60% of the, sorry, 60% of the, what are they called? What are the little capillaries called that transport oxygen into
Oh,
the
the
alveoli?
alveoli.
Yeah, alveoli.
Hmm.
60% of them. So in terms of getting oxygenated,
Mm.
if we're not breathing deeply, we're losing oxygen.
Yeah.
So
And
that's fascinating as well.
that's another piece as well, which the work of Patrick McEwen and the Oxygen Advantage is amazing for, of um, breathing not only through your nose, but increasing your capacity for carbon dioxide. So, and that actually counterintuitively increases the amount of oxygen that's available in your blood. And so
Mm.
a lot of people that tend to be prone to anxiety attacks tend to also have a low carbon dioxide tolerance. And so again, that's something you can train by, it might sound a bit weird, but you could like, if you go for a walk outside, you could hold your breath and just see how many steps you can walk before you need to breathe in again.
Mm.
And it's something that you can train pretty easily and safely, and it has a pretty significant effect on nervous system capacity by just having a greater tolerance to carbon dioxide buildup in your system.
And is there a way you can measure that, or is it more just a feeling? You can feel the progression of it.
Yeah, there's something called a BOLT score, BOLT,
Yeah.
and the way that that works is you take a inhale in and then a regular exhale, and then hold the breath at the bottom of the exhale. So not like pushing out, but just like a regular, and then
Mm.
hold,
Yeah.
and then count for how many seconds you can hold before you get, I think it's like a medium moderate sense of air hunger. So not like blue in the face,
Yeah.
but you feel it a little bit. And according to Patrick, less than 20 is basically an indication that like you need to work on your CO2 tolerance.
Yeah.
20 to
Wow.
30 is okay, and more than 30 is like good. And you can train this
Wow.
to be kind of 40 plus
Yeah.
with some practice.
Oh, I can't wait to have a crack
Hold
to
your breath.
see where I'm at. Obviously, we do it a lot anyway, but to have I never really think to measure it these days. I kind of lean on the side of gentleness a little more rather than the challenge,
Mhm.
but I'm always up for a challenge to see where the capacity is, to see if it can be stretched, especially
Great.
if it increases a general sense of resilience.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so are you doing any one-on-one work with people at the moment? Like face to
Yeah,
face?
I'm doing face to face.
Or do you have
I've
to
got
for your breathwork stuff, like do you have to do it face to face, or can you do it online?
so I do I have two founder coaching clients that's more like a regular coaching container. And
Yeah,
then I have been doing a few in-person conscious connected breathing sessions, which is the kind of 90-minute breathwork journeys.
that's what
But
I'm thinking of. Yeah,
I only do that in person
yeah,
currently.
cool.
And I've been focusing on it less. But if there's someone that requests it, I'll definitely make time for it.
So what I'm curious about is, when we in the past have talked about pranayama and yoga philosophy, um, we've talked about the way that the philosophy around the vayus connects with the way we breathe in the body, and there's some kind of predictable psychological um, experiences that marry with breathing in certain ways, be it
Mhm.
healthy or unhealthy. So when you get people on a table and you notice they're struggling to breathe into their ribs there, or their collarbones there, or way down to their belly there, and things come up for them, do you notice that there's any predictability around someone's psychological experience and the way that they're breathing?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating.
Like, what are some of the more common? Yeah, I'm
So
fascinated by it. Like, and then the second part of the question is, what's some weird shit you see? Like, do you ever like convulsing? Like, what, because this stuff happens, right?
yeah, I mean, how long do we have? There's a lot that falls into the weird shit category. But in terms of the how
Spontaneous
the breathe,
defecation on your table.
I haven't had that yet. But in terms of how the breathing patterns connect to the psychological pieces, I think some of the more interesting pieces are um in it, as we were mentioning earlier, inability to bring the breath down into like the lower part of the diaphragm or even into the pelvic floor is often correlated with a lack of embodied safety. And
Mm.
so I had an experience with one client who she was able to breathe down there deeply for really the first time in her life. And she said afterwards, like, wow, I didn't realize I've spent my entire life without feeling safe. Like
Wow.
she just like almost like a fish swimming in water. She didn't realize that this like default lack of safety was was how she'd been experiencing the world. So
Mm.
I think that's one interesting one. One pattern that I was certainly guilty of in my particularly in my early stages of getting into breath work. You'd probably laugh when you hear this, but I was diagnosed as like a um, overachieving breathing pattern. And basically what that looked like was like a full, like big breath in, like, and then like a holding and a constriction in the throat and a struggle with the
Gotcha.
exhale. And that
Got you.
that constriction in the throat for me did correlate and often correlates with other people, that kind of uh desire to control and to cling on and struggle with like letting go and relaxing and
Mm.
receiving as well. So that's a fairly common one. um
Wow.
Sometimes you'll see people that really struggle to get the breath even into their upper lungs,
Yeah.
and that lack of capacity to inhale is often reflected with like a lack of capacity in life, maybe low energy, maybe um lack of resilience, these types of things. So then you can kind of unstick the rib cage and you can help people to like feel comfortable bringing in that much energy, that much kind of intensity into their system.
Mm.
um let's see what else. um and then in terms of like things that fall into the weird shit category, gen generally like some of the most interesting pieces are when someone has had like a single event trauma, as it's called. Let's say it could be a surgery, it could be they were attacked or almost drowned, these types of things. The body, if it couldn't complete that experience, it couldn't complete the mobilization response in that moment, it gets stored. And then in this space of safety, when they're breathing, that the body will literally complete the reflex that it couldn't complete at the time. So for some people, they might like pedal their feet as if they're running, and it's like they're
Mm.
they're running away. Or the guy who had a near drowning experience, his body was just like flailing all over the place as if he was like underwater, like drowning.
Wow.
um Women experiencing sexual trauma and like pushing away and like saying like no, and we'll do this thing called an arm compression, where you stand above them and you press down, but you let them like push away whilst making a loud sound. And it's that kind of like no that they weren't able to experience at the time. So it's
Wow.
basically creating the conditions for the body to do or express or feel the things that it wasn't able to at the time because there was a disassociation or a shutdown or
Yeah. Freeze response
overwhelm.
in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. That's so fascinating.
It's crazy. It's
Yeah.
really, really wild to witness.
Um, Shifting gears a little bit, I'd love to get your take on um, the most common, or probably the most world-renowned breath work teacher is the big man Wim.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Wim's done such a cool job of bringing science into what he's achieved and showing us that we can control our autonomic functions, and we can have a say in the body's healing process, and we can influence our well-being, and we have a far greater threshold than a lot of us realize. And all of these wonderful things. And also, he's probably created a safe, although I was going to say safe place for men, but the men wouldn't see it as that. They'd see it as macho enough that a lot of men are drawn to get into the wonderful world of breath work and even spirituality. Because it's like after you do breath work, when your mind is finally still and your nervous system somewhat tempered,
Mm-hmm.
you can actually rest.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a whole different perspective on the same old issues or problems, or even on yourself. So I think that's been really cool. But in my personal experience, I cannot do the Wim Hof breathing. It's too rattling for my nervous system. And any kind of breathing techniques like that are the same. They would just throw me way out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I'd just love to get your take on the appropriateness, you personally, like on when it's relevant, and how it could also, for people like me, how and why intense breathing like that could be problematic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, the category of times when it's appropriate, I would say has shrunk drastically. But I can still see the case for people who are very in their heads, don't really have any interest in meditation, breath work, like these types of things. It reliably creates a powerful experience. And so I think that in that there can be it can ignite a sense of curiosity of like, wow, like I just had that wild experience with just breathing. Like what else is possible here? So
Yeah.
I think, and that's kind of what happened to me I went into holotropic breathwork, which is similar to Wim Hof in a way, although I think there's more like nuance to it. But I think the real dangers of Wim Hof are yes, it increases the autoimmune function in the short term, but that's because it really activates the stress response. And so for people who are living in a state of already heightened activation, then doing Wim Hof will very often send them outside of their window of tolerance. And I've had multiple students join my course because they did a Wim Hof workshop and then they felt extreme anxiety for the weeks and months afterwards. Like it sent them into that activated high tone state and they weren't brought back down into rest and relaxation. And so from that perspective, I actually think it can be potentially harmful for people that have that existing fragility or that tendency to be in that activated state. And I think for most people, and I imagine you'd agree here, that most people in our culture, what they need is the opposite. They kind of need the yin, the NSDR, the nidra, the accessing the deep rest and relaxation. And so I think part of the popularity is due to the fact that it is like reinforcing and exacerbating the patterns of like over efforting, to use one of your phrases that I love, that people, it's giving them an excuse to do that. And I question if it's actually serving people in the long run. And I'd also kind of delineate the Wim Hof breathing from the Wim Hof cold exposure, because I think cold exposure is phenomenal. And I don't have any issue with that. But I think that the style of breathing that is practiced and done so without really, without assessing contraindications or giving people like a heads up of like, hey, this could actually be quite dysregulating for you. So I do kind of think that more education and nervous system literacy, honestly, is needed
Yeah.
around these types of practices. And the same goes for there's people doing breath work for, you know, rooms of like 1,000 people with like loud music and banging drums. And again, like people may have powerful experiences and it might help some people access their emotions, but there's like a non-zero risk for, I don't know, let's say like 10-15% of participants that they will get either, you know, maybe even re-traumatized if something comes up, but they don't have the integration and the rest and relaxation on the other side, um, or they just get blasted out of the window of tolerance, they disassociate, and then they're stuck in this place of anxiousness for days, weeks, months afterwards. So I really think it is frankly irresponsible, the way that breathwork is led. And like I understand the appeal. And I almost think there needs to be like a distinction between like you know, like going to a rock concert, for example, and like having like a crazy fun experience and like that being one thing versus like what is therapeutically helpful for people and that being a separate thing. Like they're two different things. And currently I think breathwork is being marketed as this is like healing and helpful, but actually it's more of like this is like the equivalent of a rock concert where you'll like blast out of your body. Maybe you'll have like visions and things and feel tingly, but in my opinion, a lot of the time it's not actually honoring their nervous system.
Yeah. And maybe everyone's so used to seeking a high rather than
Totally.
balance.
Right.
You know,
Right.
Hannah and I used
so,
to joke she used to run an online Ayurvedic course called Balance. And as far as we could see, balance was the best name for it and the most important name. But we thought it's not going to sell because everyone wants something.
it's not sexy.
It's not sexy, but it's the most important. Like if we could only realize. And I appreciate the care you're bringing forth with what you do and the holistic or thorough nature of it as well. And it's so interesting as even with meditation too. I've worked with so many people who have done like say one meditation technique. Like one that comes to mind is the classic Vedic meditation, where there's just one technique, one mantra, one form of meditation, and people have dropped into it so deeply, so quickly, without the necessary either preparation or support tools to understand is what's happening. It's throw them into either depressive or more anxiety with no one to really turn to in terms of what do I do now?
Yeah.
And so it's always been a mission for me to be as progressive. I mean, like slow, steady steps and thorough and supportive as possible. And so I love that about what you're doing as well.
Yeah. And I love what I love about your approach with meditation is it's highly personalized. And I think that's so key because everyone's nervous system is different. Like some people might need to build that capacity, and maybe there's like a breath of fire type practice that's actually really helpful for them. Whereas other people, maybe they need to work on the interoception piece, or maybe maybe they have really high interoception, but when they tune in, they feel overwhelmed, and so they need to focus on the how do I feel safe and expand my awareness and down regulate so that I don't feel overwhelmed all the time. So it's such a personalized thing, and I think that understanding that it's almost like building different recipes for different people depending on what their challenges are, which is what I think you do an amazing job at.
Well, thank you, good sir. So these days, what does it look like? What does it look like for you on a daily basis to master your nervous system? Like, what is for you personally? What do the practices look like? Like, do you have one morning practice, or do you do a little bit morning, a little bit evening, or is it just it's peppered through the day? What's your personal approach?
Yeah, it changes all the time. I kind of continuously just experiment with myself. Um, Currently, I've really been enjoying drinking tea actually, and having like a morning tea ceremony with Kelly, my wife, and I will generally sit for 30 minutes drinking between like 4 to 5 bowls of tea and
Mm,
just like in a contemplation, and then usually sit in a kind of open awareness meditation for the next 20 to 30 minutes. Sometimes do breathing initially if my mind is kind of, if there's thoughts present, then alternate nostril breathing is often my go-to for kind of calming down the mind a little bit. Um, so that's a really nice way to start the day. And then I take our puppy for a run, kind of get outside, get some sunlight, get the body moving, um, and then try and stay as active as I can during the day. If I'm feeling tired, I'll often do like a 30-minute nidra or 30-minute NSDR, um, just after lunch. That can be super helpful. Um, and then in the evening, it's either stretching, yoga, again, maybe go for another walk outside, just like pretty simple stuff. Um, if I'm noticing emotions arising, or just something that like feels like I'm triggered by or challenged by, then I'll usually try and carve out some time in the afternoon or maybe the next morning to sit with and feel through. It's a lot. I'll sometimes join the journey and guide myself through that. Yeah, I think for me it's definitely simplified a lot in recent months and years. Um, Also sauna cold plunge. I'm fortunate to have access to that here, and so that's
nice.
uh, we have another the sauna got mold, so we had to replace it. But that was something I do, once or twice a day, and that's been,
Wow.
if you're lucky enough to have access to that, that's phenomenal. And then things like having a men's group, honestly, has been like a game changer. And every 2 weeks meeting and just having a space to tune into oh, like what is alive in me right now? Like what am I noticing? What is my interoceptive landscape showing me? And then space to express, feel, be witnessed in emotions that are present there, to
Mm,
kind of help to offset the buildup of emotional debt. Because like anyone, I can definitely get busy and just get in the run of things, and it's very easy to just uh ignore like, or just not even notice that, oh, actually I've been feeling sadness about this thing, or I'm nervous about like how is the course going to do, all these things.
mm,
So yeah, I'd say those have been the main things. And then the last one, which sounds ridiculous, but like playing with our puppy has been
mm,
so beautiful, and just I think there's something innately like healing about play, and
mm,
play is, in some ways, it's quite a like radical act in the world that we live in, because it doesn't have another agenda. There's no like prize that you get. It's just for the sake of itself, and like tuning in. And I would imagine that having a kid is this, but amplified. Um, so I think that's also been like part of my practice, is just like being really present and like playing with our puppy when she wants to play.
yeah. Yeah, totally. 100%. Yeah, no, it's the same. Definitely keeps me young and always gives me a good excuse to step not only out of the office but in my mind as well, just to be so
Mhm.
present. And it's interesting to watch as just hold on one sec actually. Speaking of I'm just gonna open this office door, bring in the microphone with me, because they've just gone out, and sometimes it makes the internet work a little bit better. It's also a bit shaky. But it's so funny to notice that when we sit down to play, sometimes I'll be kind of on the outside watching him play as my mind, but as I play a bit more, my mind calms down. And then eventually at some point, I'm so in the game that I've just
Yeah.
forgotten about the whole world. And I'm like, these animals, these toy animals or these cars, they're just alive. And, like it's so cool to just be so immersed and absorbed in whatever the
Yeah.
game is. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
I
beautiful.
can totally relate. A
Beautiful.
couple of to steal a phrase from you, rapid fire questions. The first one is, what do you want, if anything, your legacy to be?
Damn.
Wait, can I guess?
Sure.
Your do you still use Evernote?
I've switched to Notion, but I've
Okay.
imported from Evernote.
Well, your legacy could be the skillfulness through which you use online note keeping.
Yes, nailed it. That's what I want on my gravestone. He
It could be
organized
like, it
his
should be
notes.
displayed at the National English Library Museum, something. Anyway,
Yeah,
legacy.
that is potentially part of it. It's an interesting question. I would say, like, I could probably sum it up with like the question of like, did I love well? I think that's essentially what it comes down to for me.
Mm.
Um, you know, I would love to be part of spreading nervous system literacy and these ideas and sharing that. Like that'd be wonderful. Um, and yeah, and the more that I guess the more in touch with myself that I get, the less that legacy feels like it matters to me. But that said, I imagine my wife and I think of trying for kids next year, and so if and when that happens, I would imagine, yeah, maybe this is what it would be. It would be passing on um, a well-regulated nervous system to future generations, and in the process, increasing their capacity for um, presence and love.
Beautiful. How has um, mastering your own nervous system, to whatever degree you do and have, impacted your marriage?
These are meant to be rapid fire questions. It's like a
The rapid on my side, I can
whole
ask
other
them rapidly. It
podcast.
doesn't mean that. Yeah, true.
Oh, Jesus.
Maybe we'll do round two on that one.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, I had a like fun chat with a friend yesterday who we were basically comparing notes that having challenges or like bumps or triggers arise in your relationship combined with an effective tool for working through and processing them. So for him, it was this thing called Alethea, and for me, it was breath work. Is like the fast track and also what's the word? Just challenging fast track to personal growth and transformation, I think. And
Mm.
I would say that it has marriage and intimate partnership has both tested and increased my nervous system capacity as well as my capacity to be with intensity in myself and in my partner without needing to change it, fix it, needing it to be different in some way, and to be in a place of loving presence. And yeah, in many ways, I actually feel like a different, fundamentally different in certain ways than I did 3 to 4 years ago before Kelly and I got together. Like we've been through a lot together, and it is the greatest, let's say this, like the greatest arena for testing and also increasing your capacity for regulation and presence.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Perfectly said. Yeah. And
Yeah.
final rapid fire. That might once again not be the most rapid answer. So, how old's your dog, Bowler?
She just turned one last week.
So, I imagine there's a lot of play, but probably some dog training as well.
Yeah.
Um, what similarities do you see with training a dog and training your own mind, if any?
Mm. Um,
Because so many people talk about, they use the analogy of tying the puppy to a post, puppy mind, like training a dog. Like a lot of people use that
yeah,
analogy. And
sure,
so, yeah, it just
sure.
popped up as a point of interest to go, what do you see
Yeah,
with
fun.
your own mind that you
So
see reflected?
I like there's a principle, there are two interesting principles I think overlap. One is um really avoiding negative reinforcement or punishment in any way. And that actually, whilst it may appear to be effective in the short term, it's not necessary, and there's a bunch of downstream consequences which aren't great. So really focusing on positive reinforcement, and I think that can apply to our minds and puppies. And then the other piece is like environment design. And there's an idea in puppy training that if your puppy like chews your slipper or something, then it's kind of your fault because you've set up the environment in a way where she has access to that slipper, and so she can fail. But the art is like designing the environment in such a way that the puppy can't fail. And so I think there's a similar case to be made in terms of like designing our external environments so that then they design us in return. And so that can be applied to, you know, obvious stuff like not having a ton of shitty processed food like within easy access of a shelf, or making it easy to uh, get outside and get some sunlight in the morning. There's a lot of kind of like environment design pieces which um, reduce friction for the things that we want to do more of and increase friction for the things that we want less of.
Got yeah. Perfect. Unreal. There you go. Crossovers, training the mind, training the puppy. I knew there'd be
I like it.
links. I knew it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to when we had Basil and he was a puppy. One thing I remember is just his complete inability to not react to and chase after whatever came in contact with his senses.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, having a space between stimulus and response. So as he got
Mm-hmm.
older, you could see he could smell something or hear something, but wouldn't have to act upon it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and I go, well, that's so funny and so similar to what we experience with our senses.
Yeah.
We can hear, see, taste, smell, touch, feel, and just be in the experience and then decide, does this warrant a bark or not? Let me make the choice. You know?
Yeah.
So
Lola's
I
actually
remember.
she's just stopped chasing after deer now, and it's really cool because it now means that we can go off leash, and so she has
Yeah,
way more
cool.
freedom. But that's been like a thing in the last couple of weeks.
Amazing. Do where can our friends that watch this recording get in contact with you or check out more of what you're up to?
Yeah. Let's see. So if the nervous system stuff is of interest, then the website is nsmastery.com.
I can put the link
We have
in the show notes. I feel like I've never said
yeah.
that. It's not a podcast. Is it a podcast? I don't know, but I just had to
I
say
don't
that
know.
just to sound fancy.
It's not
I'll
not
put the
not
link in the
not a
show
podcast.
notes. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And there's 2 cohorts a year. Next one's in spring, as of this recording time. And then the podcast where you can listen to our conversation from a while back is Curious Humans, which is on most good podcast players.
And Curious
And
Humans, like I don't know if I presume most, or at least a few people that are going to be watching this are aware of you, but if you're not, it is like fantastic podcast. One of the goods, one of the, because there's a lot of good stuff on there.
thank you. Yeah, it's a ton of fun. And then yeah, if you're on Twitter, I'm pretty active on Twitter at Jonny Miller with a 1. And feel free to email me as well. I'm Jonny@curioushumans.com. I'm generally pretty responsive if you have questions or curiosities. Always love to hear from people.
And your newsletter is a big deal.
I appreciate that.
So how do we get on that? Because
yeah,
I appreciate getting because I'm always read through them like if you need to know about something, it's coming through on Johnny's email.
nice. Well, curioushumans.com or Jonny JONNY.life. I think is the sign up for the newsletter. And
Yeah.
yeah, I send that every 2 or 3 weeks, and whenever I feel inspired.
Yeah. And it's I presume you got a pretty solid following through that email list now too. I presume. I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, several
And
thousand at this point.
quite rightfully so. So thank you for being you and doing what you do in the world, and for your care and your interest and your gentleness and your thoroughness and your curiosity, of course. And most of
Well,
all, thank you for denying Lola extra playtime to come and have a chat.
she's been scratching at the door. Well, thank you, man. Like, this has been such a pleasure, and I've said this before, but I really I felt like our mentorship sessions and the training that we did together just laid the foundation in such a beautiful way for everything that was to come. So
Oh,
just
so cool.
deep appreciation for who you are and what you do in the world.
Thanks, brother. Chat to you soon.
Cool.